Hey everybody, this is Prince Mouse, and welcome to a video talking about Remnant from the Ashes, a little known Souls-like game I should say, that some of you might have played, some of you might have thought about, maybe heard about. This game sort of came out, sort of peak, I want to say, of the phase of every game coming out and being a Souls-like. And for that reason, I think it's sort of fallen off a lot of people's radar. And I want to tell you today, why maybe you should start caring. And getting straight to the point, the sequel is coming out soon. This is probably one of my favorite Souls-like games that's not strictly Dark Souls or anything like that. I keep coming back to it, and every time I do, it's because I'm showing like somebody in my friend group what to look forward to in the game, basically. And this is sort of the culmination of that because I really want people to get really hyped for this game because I know the sequel is going to be just amazing if all the pieces are put together correctly. So talking about it exactly, maybe you don't know what Remnant is. What is it exactly? Remnant is basically a Souls-like, like I said, that's also a third-person shooter, and sort of has these sort of roguelite elements to them. So whenever you start the game, you're given the option of picking one of three archetypes. These don't matter very much. They're very much like Dark Souls Origins or Dark Souls like classes that you pick. And whenever you get their equipment, you can immediately start using another archetype's equipment whenever you want. There's kind of a lot of options starting out in that way. So talking about the classes some, you have things like the Scrapper, which is like a melee-oriented close-range fighter. Starts with a shotgun. Then you have the Hunter, which is more accuracy-focused, has a hunting rifle with a semi-automatic fire, good range on it. And then the Ex-Cultist, which has a coach gun, which it focuses more on mods and stuff like that. They don't sound super interesting right at the get-go, but that's also because that's kind of not what Remnant wants you to necessarily pay attention to. The archetypes are kind of set up to be as vague as possible because building your character comes with the other big portion of Remnant, which is to say its random generation aspect. So whenever you start a new playthrough, you'll be set on the same first level as everybody else. But very quickly, if you were to compare your playthrough with another person's playthrough, either one that you're watching or that you're playing alongside or whatever, you'll find that things like your item drops are different and your terrain generation is slightly different. And that's sort of the procedural roguelite aspect of this game coming into play. So for instance, if you find something like a necklace that gives you better fire rate, like faster fire rate, and better firearm swap speed, your buddy that you may be playing with or have their own playthrough or whatever, come across something like a whole new gun, like a revolver instead of that necklace. And it's just basically that aspect, that random generation aspect of finding new equipment, but it spans the entirety of the game. Basically every world that you go in is kind of its own pool of weapons and equipment and armor and stuff like that. And going through them and continuing to play the game will end up defining your build by sort of the roguelike nature of playing, and basically playing the cards that you're dealt at that point. So talking about what exactly encompasses a build gets kind of interesting, and this is already becoming sort of a mess when discussing it, but we'll just go through it anyway because, like I said, I want people to be interested in the game, and there is a lot to be intrigued about. The gameplay background footage you're seeing here is basically just an abridged version of what you would be going through in the game anyway, which is the game's survival mode is another auxiliary sort of bonus mode you can go through with its own rewards and stuff. It's super cool. But I should also mention that if you have been watching up until now, there is sort of spoilers for areas and equipment, especially in regards to enemies and bosses, and like I said, some weapons and armor that you might find. So if you would rather not see it, then just watch the video and probably don't look at it because, like I said, if you want to see what else to go on and really experience everything, then that's up to you, but it honestly doesn't matter that much. Like I was saying about builds and stuff, encompassing what builds do. We'll talk about things like weapons. Obviously, you have different types of weapons. An assault rifle versus a shotgun is going to be built differently. You have a shotgun, which is low range, high damage, spreads like a motherfucker, and allows you to hit maybe multiple targets at once. And you'll get stats and stuff like that to further accentuate those parts of what the weapon is good at. So if you have a weapon, it's basically your bread and butter for your build naturally. Kind of like any other Souls game, but this time it's a gun that's doing it, which is already kind of cool if you wanted to go for that. Playing with this shotgun, for instance, allows you to do things like build into shot speed or reload speed, and suddenly you're able to minimize on downtime in a way that's so unbelievably fast that nothing can really get close to you. And it already has pretty good damage, so you don't have to worry about much else. You can do other things too, like starting with the Hunter's hunting rifle, gives you access to more accurate shots at a decent distance. And basically any character can make use of it anyway, because it's sort of the jack-of-all-trades kind of weapon to start out with, right? So you might instead want to find yourself building into weak spot damage, which are things like headshots, which already do extra damage, and then they can also crit on top of that. Crit's its own status effect, you can build into that too. Maybe you don't want to do any of those, and instead you really like how the game's mod system works. Mods, basically, are what I can best describe as Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring's weapon art system, or Ash of War system, and then also a spell system. So using your alternate fire on any weapon will end up using the weapon's mod that's attached to it. Boss weapons have ones you can't customize, normal weapons have their own mods that you can slot into, and it's similar more to like the Ash of War system in that way. And there's a bunch of ashes for that too. You can start the game as the ex-cultist, which like I said has the shotgun, but primarily their mod is being able to use a Mender's Aura, which is a heal field. And again, you start the game with this, so if you want to go for something that's support-oriented or really good at not getting you and your buddies killed, then you can just use that, and suddenly find yourself standing in an area regenerating HP so fast that nothing can kill you in that area, you know, roughly, unless they hit you with some crazy shit. Now then there's other ones too. Every class, every archetype, I should say, starts with their own mod as well. The Hunter gets a Hunter's Mark, which marks every enemy so you can see them through walls, and increases everybody's crit rate, which is great. And is honestly kind of an unsung hero for the beginning part of the game. I feel like a lot of people kind of sleep on it. In other news, probably one of the best attack mods to start out with is the Hot Shot from the Scrapper, which just infuses your bullets with fire, so now everything takes tick fire damage. And how these mods interact with other weapons is something you also have to consider. So Hot Shot is much better on a rapid-fire weapon like an assault rifle or an SMG or something like that. And even though it's guaranteed, it might be something you consider using or don't consider using for those reasons. The other primary part to this is also armor. So whenever you're given armor, you obviously have the starting ones, which aren't super interesting, but they do give you a good window into what you should be considering for your build. So something like the Scrapper is enemies in unbelievably close ranges to you take extra damage. Okay, good. And it already starts with a shotgun, which is even better, and is meant to be smacking stuff around with a big-ass hammer. Cool. Hunter starts with armor that allows them to deal more damage to weak spots. Okay, great. They're going to probably be targeting those anyway. Ex-Cultist gets auto mod generation, which is probably the best, makes it immediately the best armor set in the game, at least starting out, and especially if you like using mods, auto-genning them is great. But it's stuff like this too. All of this equipment that I'm talking about for just the starting classes, of course you can find and discover and create all of these pieces of equipment as time goes on too. The random generation aspect is of course kind of a blessing and a curse, as it naturally is in a game with any sort of random generation, because maybe you do want your buddy's revolver that they picked up, and you don't necessarily want the shot speed necklace that you got. Remnant has a sort of underlying issue that doesn't make it perfect, that the random generation in the game means that nothing is ever going to be guaranteed. It means you're not allowed to basically be super attached to any one thing. And trying to find a perfect build for your character and your playthrough is gonna kind of start driving you insane, which is why I think just as a ground rule, if you start the game and go through it, probably be open to changing how your build functions just based on how you think it feels. Do a lot of experimenting and see how stuff really works out for you. And even if you're somebody who's played the game before and wants to go back, come into every build with an open mind, because you might find ways that sort of splash into, you know, one damage type splashing into how you can keep yourself alive and stuff of that nature. So like you'll run around and you like your rapid weapons and you really want to do things that increase your fire rate, but the game is just not giving you your fire rate ring or your fire rate trait, or, you know, this, that, or the other. But it did give you something like a necklace that makes it to where whenever you use this game's version of the Estus Flask, it heals everybody else. And you know what? That's cool too. Now you're a partial support. Maybe you can also at that point find the other armor pieces that give everybody an attack buff every time you heal. I guess we can start talking about also the things that don't exactly make this game perfect, considering that was kind of a huge underlying issue that I mentioned already. And obviously it has a lot to do with the sort of randomness of this game, but also it just comes to the game's design, which I think is a little shoddy in places and seems like it could have been tested maybe a bit better before actually getting to release. So picture this for a moment. You have your character and you have a weapon and armor and equipment that you like so far. And you're going through the game, having a pretty good time. Maybe you brought a buddy along. I'd recommend doing that. We'll talk about that later. And you're both kind of just fucking shit up as time goes on. And it's good. You're having a good time. Then suddenly you come across this weird structure in the middle of the map and you're like, what the hell is this thing? It looks sort of like a big stone monolith. This is basically, I don't remember what they are off the top of my head, but I know that these big stone monoliths have a chance of appearing in just about every level that you could play in Remnant, and they all have their own unlock requirements. This is a compounded sort of biggest possible issue that might rear its ugly head more than a couple times in your playthrough, and it could really, really severely drag down your experience if you really want to leave no stone unturned for your build, considering maybe you're not a completionist by heart, but you want to see what all of your playthrough has to offer compared to somebody else. So these stone monolith things, I don't know what exactly you would want to call them, but I like to call them Part A and Part B puzzles, or two-part puzzles. What you basically need to do is randomly generate the lock or a key to something, and then also have the random generation work in your favor to find its corresponding lock and or key. So a simpler example. In the first level of the game, you could potentially find this character who's sitting in a helicopter. He's a merchant, and talking with him enough times, buying and selling his stuff, or sorry, just buying his stuff, might end up getting a key item from him. So you're like, okay, weird, this random key gave me an achievement as well, but I don't know where to use it. And unless you're searching on a wiki or you get really lucky, really lucky, you're not going to know what it's for. And this is a key to a two-part puzzle, the lock being a boss and an alternate way to basically deal with the boss. What you then need to do is find a sort of bandit leader, bandit captain, whatever you want to really regard him as, and then show him that you got this key from that person in the helicopter and that he gave it to you willingly. This will end up netting you a completely unique armor set that maybe you do want to use. Maybe it's kind of exactly how your build wants to function, or maybe you just want to do it because you can. And on paper, this does seem like a good idea. The problem is that whenever you're dealing with more than 1 percentile chance for something, it means that getting both of those percentages to proc off and actually get them to work becomes kind of an astronomically low chance. The monoliths I was talking about earlier, I have never been to the end result of a monolith in all of my time playing the game, and I have 4 1/3 playthrough of this game. I have a couple monoliths saved on those characters, and I've yet to find the keys to those monoliths because I just couldn't be bothered. They also have unique pieces of armor, but by God, they're just so annoying to make spawn in because the chances to get them are so unbelievably low. And that's kind of a huge issue. Like I said, if you're not worried about that and this is your first playthrough, then obviously you don't have to bother with it. But if you're somebody that wants to go through the game and have fun with everything it has to offer, then you're going to have either a key and a lock sitting in some place, either your inventory or out in the world, that doesn't do anything for a while. And that's just kind of annoying because, again, the most recommended idea I can give you is don't worry about it unless you have free time and don't have anything better to do. If you would rather just go through the story or go through an adventure on a different level, then just do that, because I guarantee you'll have more fun. I could give things like recommendations on how to fix this, but instead I'm just going to hope that the sequel fixes this issue. We have other things too, much shorter, I promise. Like some of the bosses being relatively disbalanced. The first DLC, the Swamps of Corsus, have an end boss that is so unbelievably hard to fight that unless you have a very specific build to deal with it, and you have 3 people trucking along with you, well, 2, including you, you're going to basically struggle on that boss, and it's going to be a really weird giant spike in difficulty for no reason. It's kind of super lame, and the only time I was able to deal with it correctly, without struggling, was still on my second try with the playthrough I just had, with 2 of my friends. So that's a thing, and that's also kind of an issue that the game faces in a couple of other aspects too. Obviously, some builds are going to handle some bosses differently, some better, some worse, and that's fine. That's kind of the expected with something like Souls. I always like hearing about what's people's least favorite boss in any given Souls game, because odds are that least favorite boss is going to be different based on player playstyle. And again, that's fine, because it's ultimately up to preference and what the boss does to challenge your preference in playstyle, and maybe it did enough for you to warrant changing your playstyle. The issue is that when, especially early game in Remnant, you might not have very many options to change your playstyle, and instead have to slog through just basically running your head into this boss until it dies. Without any real skill expression either. It could just literally be, you don't do enough damage, sorry, go fuck yourself. And that sucks. That really sucks. But I mean, if you're willing to work through it and still just want to see the game to its end, then it's ultimately not that big of a deal, but it will be a particularly negative mark in your head if you go, man, I really don't like this one boss in specific, and it's because it's way too hard. No, trust me, I know. I hate Exilis. I think everybody should. And most of the bosses in ROM, the other DLC, is kind of also a nightmare, especially in survival mode. Runs end in ROM. I swear, every time. The other issue that I can compound as well is the story. It's not necessarily bad, it's just kind of super forgettable, and honestly that's really lame for the unique premise that the game sets out for itself. That's why I say spoilers for the game aren't necessarily super important, because as it stands, the story isn't super important, and all that you're really working for here whenever you're playing the game is a particularly unique gameplay experience, because again, the story doesn't exist mostly. I hope also that the sequel fixes this, at least to some degree, but that has to do with things like having better written characters, I feel, and also a story that's a bit more maybe cohesive despite being inspired by Souls. But that's just me. I'm not sure how you would fix it, and I'm not exactly a writer, so I'm not really going to throw my hat into that too much. But ultimately, in terms of stains on the game, it's certainly the smallest one, I promise. But we'll loop back around now. And honestly, despite all of that I've said, I do want you to try the game still. Try and play it and see if you really enjoy it. Because I certainly enjoy it. And I keep going back to it because I want to try something new. And because the game keeps giving me new things to try and to play with. And I don't know, it's super cool. Having as many playthroughs as I do, playing with all of my friends that I was able to show, my friends the game, has also revealed to me that there's kind of a lot of replayability in this game as well. Obviously, because of the random generation aspect, that's a no shit, because, like, of course, playing the game on any given playthrough is going to reveal to you different and unique things about that playthrough with equipment and such. But also, there's such thing that exists called account items, which stay with all of your characters, and these have very specific unlock requirements. There's a couple you can get in the main story, but primarily going through the game's hardcore mode, which is a permadeath mode, and making headway into that will end up unlocking things for the rest of your characters, including future hardcore characters. And this is a good idea. I think in terms of any permadeath mode, this is probably the best handled permadeath I've ever seen in a video game. Because even if you die, it doesn't mean you wasted your time. At least not on the first, barrier you broke, or the latest barrier you broke. Because obviously you're improving at the game little bit by little bit, but also you've literally unlocked something that you can use for the rest of your account. So account items in this way are kind of extremely valuable because most of them are also really good. The other unlock primarily for them is to play survival mode a bunch, which if you want something to just fuck around and play because you're bored of everything else in your Steam library, but not quite bored of Remnant, then this has been my go-to for a good little while because I also need glowing fragments to buy armor skins and stuff like that for my chosen apparel. That's also the background footage from here as well as the survival mode. I'm sure you could gather that. And survival mode's cool because it's just basically an abridged version of a regular game's playthrough, but infinite, and you can just continuously get stronger. Like I said though, anytime you come across the last DLC area in the survival mode, I swear to God it wasn't play tested and you just basically die there. And most of the time it's from gravity because gravity instant kills you. We're gonna wrap things up here because I think I'm starting to get a little rambly. But basically, there's a lot of options for Remnant. I think that whenever it comes to particularly unique experiences, you're probably not going to find anything quite like this again, aside from its sequel, which is going to come out soon. And I want to drive home that this game is probably worth your time if you like roguelikes, souls-likes, and third-person shooters as well. There's a lot to look forward to, and especially if you want to give some good thought to your character and really feel powerful with certain ideas and certain ways you want to build, then the game has that in spades. Certain issues with balance and spikes in difficulty and other things like that aren't necessarily a gigantic issue because they're just kind of these weird hiccups on a game that's otherwise pretty good and I think people need to give more credit to. But I don't know, I think that's about all that I have. Go try Remnant. It's really good, and if you like it, then look forward to the sequel, because I know I will, and I can only hope that they add more and give better focus to the issues that I had before. It certainly looks better, but we still don't know how it plays yet, so I'm hoping it's good. But other than that, I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here, I think. Y'all have a good one, and go try Remnant. Goodbye.